Well, now to one of the most important stories of our time, Syria. As we reported this week, a chemical watchdog group known as the OPCW published a report 4 years later saying that Syria did in fact use chemical weapons on civilians in 2018 in the city of Douma. Now, this event was used, of course, to justify the UK joining the US and France in bombing Syria and destroying this beautiful country. Joining me now is Dr. Piers Robinson, co-director for the Organization for Propaganda Studies, also a member of the Berlin 21 group, and former chair in Politics, Society, and Political Journalism at Sheffield University. He's been highlighting the problems with the OPCW's investigation for years. There's perhaps no better authority on this subject anywhere in the world. Dr. Robinson, thanks so much for joining us here on Redacted. Welcome.
It's good to be with you.
Well, it's our pleasure. What was your response to this new report from the OPCW? It's kind of interesting that it's 4 years after the event, but what was your just sort of initial response here? This report basically saying, yeah, nothing to see here. The Syrian military used chemical weapons on its own people. Case closed. Move on.
Well, we've been waiting and expecting this report for some time. All of those who have been following the OPCW Douma controversy have been fully aware that at some point the investigation and identification team would put out a further report in order to attribute responsibility. And so everyone's been waiting for this. It's been an incredible length of time for them to produce and put this report out, which raises a whole series of questions about why now. And I guess some analysts would suggest that maybe there's a strategic advantage seen at the moment in relation to the conflict in Ukraine as to putting a report out which not only accuses the Syrian government of chemical weapons, but also ties in the Russian Federation for supporting the Syrian government. I think the other aspect of the length of time that is taken is the question of whether or not they have been hoping that the kind of controversy that emerged when the first fact-finding mission report came out in 2019, when whistleblowers emerged from within the OPCW saying that the investigation had been manipulated, had been distorted. I suspect there was some hope that maybe if it was left long enough that those voices and other people who were supporting those whistleblowers might have sort of given up the ghost or just feel they don't want to pursue the issue any longer. So I think that might be part of the timing explanation for this report coming out. But the report itself is to be expected. It reinforces the fact-finding mission report, which was published in 2019, which essentially concluded the attack had occurred and strongly indicated that it's a Syrian government. As you mentioned, Britain, France, and America bombed within a week of the alleged attack before the OPCW investigation had started. So there was, in a sense, a lot of political pressure for the OPCW to have that finding. So the fact that now, after so many years and after all the controversy over the fact-finding mission report, it's not surprising that the IIT has confirmed and attempted to shore up its original conclusions and in line with US, British, and French allegations.
What did these initial whistleblowers find was wrong with this report? What did they tell us about the investigation? And it was, of course, the mainstream media ignored the story, hid that part of the story. And all of their coverage of this OPCW report this week, the mainstream media makes no mention of the whistleblowers who had initial problems with the initial investigation. Can you walk me through what they found?
Sure. It's quite remarkable what happened in the original investigation in Douma. And what happened was that the team who deployed to Douma came back to The Hague and they produced their first report. And their first report essentially highlighted significant question marks over the cylinders, which are alleged to have caused a gas attack. The idea that they dropped from a helicopter and hit buildings. They raised significant questions about how the 30 civilians had died. And this was all put into the original interim report. And what happened was that somebody came and altered that report and manipulated it and essentially attempted to have published a report which said, to all intent and purposes, a chemical attack occurred. And this caused the initial internal dispute within the OPCW, where the person involved in writing the original interim report said, wait a minute, this is our report has been altered without our permission, without consulting us, and it's making claims which cannot be substantiated. And really, the story has been a pretty sort of consistent one since then, is that attempts to from people within the organization to raise questions and to challenge the analysis which is being made have been suppressed. And over time, as more and more voices externally, there were leaks to WikiLeaks documents came out. There was the Courage Foundation panel in the autumn of 2019. A large number of eminent figures, including Jose Bastani, the first Director General of the OPCW, supported the issues being raised by the scientists. And essentially what the scientists were saying was that there was not an evidence that the attack had occurred, that there were serious question marks. And the story for 4 years now has been a long one of suppressing those concerns, attacking misrepresentation of the whistleblowers, smearing the whistleblowers in the media, smearing anybody who actually tries to support the questions that they're raising, and so on. But that's the bottom line to this, is that, and the IIT report carries through the flaws or the issues which were raised by the inspectors into the IIT report. And the questions actually still remain, the core questions remain, that there is a question mark over how the 30 to 40 civilians died in Douma. The original toxicology report by NATO toxicologists made very clear that it was not chlorine gas which poisoned them, and that report has been suppressed over the years. And then the other question about the remarkable lack of damage on cylinders which are supposed to have punched a hole in a ceiling, which just doesn't make any sense from the engineer's point of view, who would question this. And those questions are completely unresolved in the IIT report. So in some ways, I suspect that scientists who did raise questions about the investigation are probably feeling somewhat vindicated at this point, that after so many years, the IIT and the OPCW have been unable to resolve the issues which were originally raised by the scientists.
You see a clear line, right? I mean, you have a 1 week after this happens that the United States, France, and the UK spring into action without an investigation. They jump right into action. And of course, to anyone who's cynical like me and looks at what these warmongering countries have done for so many years, is leap into a plan that had already been mobilized in order to destabilize this country. Am I too cynical here, or is that exactly probably what happened?
No, I think the issue of alleged chemical weapons attacks in Syria, and I've been researching and looking at this for a long time, as well as being involved in Berlin Group 21 in relation to the OPCW issue. But what you have, as you have in all wars, you have attempts to build propaganda narratives which paint the enemy country in a particular light. And one of the narratives which has been produced consistently over the last 10 years has been the chemical weapons narrative. It's in a way, it's very similar to what we saw with Iraq and weapons of mass destruction, except here you actually have not just allegations of production, but actual allegations of use. Now, the problem is when you look closely at these alleged incidents, time and time again, serious question marks immediately emerge about, well, do these actually look like staged events? Are these actually, what people refer to as false flags in military terms? And as somebody who's looked from the Ghouta 2013 mass casualty attack right through to Douma now, this is what it looks like. And so I think, broadly, we have part of building the propaganda narrative to legitimate Western support for overthrow the Syrian government, and building, as it were, the moral case through propaganda, through accusations of chemical weapons use and so on. It's a very familiar thing in wartime. It's propaganda and deception, and it's used to not so much mobilize people in support, because I think public awareness is very low in relation to Syria, but certainly to stop people starting to ask more questions about what is going on in relation to that war.
Are you surprised that the mainstream media, the corporate media, has not been more interested in getting to the bottom of this, asking those tough questions? Instead, it seems that they are simply mouthpieces of this propaganda agenda.
Not at all. I mean, my background is studying foreign policy, war, and media, and that's where I did my research PhD, where most of my academic publications are in that area. And it's well known that in wartime, mainstream media independence which even in peacetime is struggles, and that's putting it politely. But in wartime, media fall into propaganda drives, and it happens time and time again. It happened in Vietnam. It happened in Gulf War I, Falklands War, the Iraq, WMD propaganda. The mainstream media certainly fell for that back in 2002.
And they were complicit.
The invasion. And they, well, broadly speaking, they were complicit. They don't ask the tough questions. And certainly in a case such as the Syrian war, where there is sort of very little understanding of the conflict itself, and in a sense, very little sort of public sympathy for, say, the Syrian government and so on. These are seen as countries over there. It's very easy to build demonizing narratives, and it's very easy for the mainstream media just to go along with it. But this is nothing new. This is what you see in wartime after wartime situation. You see extensive propaganda and deceptive propaganda as well in relation to wars. So no surprise regarding the mainstream media. Some exceptions there, but it's been, watching the last week, it's been quite amazing. And it's been quite amazing seeing the mainstream media completely forgetting about the OPCW whistleblowers.
It is amazing.
Who had raised so many questions over the years. Extraordinary.
And that's a very good point to bring up, which is the original OPCW whistleblowers. As Aaron Mate has often talked about, the original OPCW investigation was good, if I'm not mistaken, right? What it initially found was accuracy until it was manipulated. And so in many ways, the OPCW report, the OPCW did its job initially. Am I wrong about that characterization?
Well, you're right that the people who were in charge of were writing the original report were being objective. And there was clearly been, the OPCW scientists who have raised questions, and there have been other people within the OPCW who I've been in contact with who have raised similar questions about what's going on. Those people have been trying to be objective, yes. The core problem, without getting into too much sort of detail, again, the core problem with the fact-finding missions on Syria as part of the OPCW is that they are not controlled by the scientific divisions. They're controlled by the Office of the Director General. And the Office of the Director General, the Chief of Cabinet, powerful position, staffed by career diplomats in the UK during the Douma investigation, a career diplomat, Sebastian Braha, following the release of the final report. And so you essentially have the danger of, at the very least, of bureaucratized management of the FFMs, or just straightforward politicized. And that is a foundational problem with the FFMs, is that these don't look like proper objective scientific investigations, which the OPCW as an organization and all of the scientists there would be perfectly capable of doing and do in other situations. But the Syria FFMs have been, in a sense, controlled. And this is a point we're making in a report that Berlin Group 21 is producing at the moment, is that this is suboptimal from the point of view of an independent investigation when you have bureaucratic stroke political control and you don't allow the scientists to be in charge. So for sure, the scientists were doing a good job, but they were nobbled, as it were, and suppressed.
No, great point. And I'll get you out of here on this, Doctor, which is, we talked a little bit at the beginning about the timing of this report. You had last week the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, in Ramstein, Germany, talking about this narrow window of opportunity right now for NATO in Ukraine in order to funnel weapons and in order to basically keep Ukraine from collapsing. And the timing of this report release to, as somewhat might speculate, to throw a wrench into the works of what Russia has planned in this spring offensive to distract or draw Russia into a further proxy war in Syria, therefore watering down what they might be able to do in Ukraine. Just the release of this report, given this same narrow window that Secretary Austin was referring to, is very, very curious. Did you not find that this report release timing was a little odd?
Yeah, I mean, I try to steer away from sort of areas where I have to speculate, and of course we're speculating. Why did they release the report right now? But we certainly, there could be two aspects to this speculation. One is that this is seen as a way of shoring up the propaganda narrative in the Ukraine, as you described. But another reason why it might be being released now is that it might get less attention than it would otherwise do. That there's a lot of heat around the Ukraine. Because my reading, and that has been for a long time, and certainly my own experience as a researcher, is that the one thing that they have wanted to avoid is people paying attention to the alleged attack in Douma, because there's so many obvious problems with it. So when you look at the details, some of them are absurd about what is being claimed. And so actually it might be a case of misdirection. They want to release this report now because they're hoping it will be buried a little bit. But as you say, you could be right, and it could be that this is seen as helping to shore up the Ukraine anti-Russia propaganda, which has been, we've had that in huge volumes for years now. And I think going away anytime soon.
In our experience, there's very little just given to chance these days. All seems pretty strategic these days. Thank you so much for this analysis. We will continue. We will look for your Berlin 21 report. Please share it with us. We will cover it here on the show. And please, thank you so much for joining us and bringing your unbelievable expertise on this story. I think this is one of the most important stories in the world, and I hope that our audience will share this story out with people who are, maybe towing the narrative, the propaganda narrative line that's being fed to them by the mainstream media. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here on Redacted.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.